I'm going to solve the 2012 AP Environmental Science free response question. Pause the video and go ahead and read the prompt up at the top, and also read the givens. Even if the givens are confusing right now, just go ahead and read through them once. And when you're done, go ahead and unpause the video. All right, so letter C, I. Calculate the mass in carbon in kilograms that is accumulated and stored in 1 hectare of forest in 1 year. Sometimes students get thrown off by what HA is, and that's a hectare, and it's just a unit of land in the metric system. So you might be used to acres. So acre is a unit of land, but in the metric system we use hectares, and they are similar. So for this, I need to look at all of my givens and figure out which ones I need to use. And so I look at mass of carbon stored in 1 hectare of forest in 1 year. So let me go up and look at my forest ones. Okay, so this one's on the forest. It grows that much. Okay, here's also the forest. 50% carbon by mass. I don't see anything else about the forest, so it looks like I'm just going to use those two givens. So you need to systematically just look at the words that you have. So we're looking at hectares of forest, and then we found it up here in the chart. So carbon is stored in 1 year. This says annual, which means every year. It puts on that much weight per hectare. And 50% carbon by mass. So if I just go ahead and write this down, and half of that is carbon, and it's asking me for the carbon, then I just need to multiply it by 50%, or halve it. So 50% is 0.5. And when I do this, and you might be able to do this in your head, and that's okay. You need to write out the setup. So I have the setup here. If you can't do it in your head, that's fine. You can do 2.7 times 0.5, and you can solve it over here this way. And there's 1 here and 1 here, so that's 2, and then I need to go 1, 2. So my answer is 1.35. Now, careful, don't forget times 10 to the 5. And that is the mass of the carbon in kilograms per hectare. Don't forget units in your work. Don't forget units in your answers. So again, I have units here. I have units here. Extremely important. On a lot of years, you don't get credit unless you have your units. All right, going on to CII. Calculate the mass of carbon in kilograms that is emitted by the school as a result of its fuel oil consumption in a year. So California kids, you don't know about fuel oil, but it is something that you have for your heaters. So a lot of people in other states, especially back east, they have heaters that run on fuel oil. And so that's what that is. Okay, so this school runs on fuel oil. So let's see what givens have fuel oil and schools. So let's see. The district uses this much gallons of fuel oil. It doesn't say school, but I think they mean that for district here. And they want to know the mass of carbon. So it says here this much CO2 for each gallon, and then this much carbon per CO2. All right, and the others I don't need. So that's 3 givens I need in this problem. That's kind of a lot. So when I set it up, this one's a little bit tricky. It's trickier than the next ones. So this one would be the hardest from this set. So I have gallons here, and that's how much the school or district uses. And then the next given tells us that 10 kilograms of CO2 is produced per gallon. That's great, those gallons cancel out, but we just need straight carbon. And it tells us up there that are per kilogram of CO2. And now my kilograms of CO2 cancel out. So one of the things that you need to make sure when you're looking up here is that when it says for or contains or whatever, you can think of it as per. So 1.0 kilograms of CO2 per 0.27 kilograms of carbon. And when you have a per, you can draw a line and put one number at the top and one number at the bottom. And actually, whichever one you want at the top or at the bottom. Whichever one you need, not whichever one you want, whichever one you need in the problem. So if you look down here, this given, it's a per also, it doesn't say per, but it is, so 10 grams of carbon dioxide when a gallon is burned. So you could write it as 1 gallon per 10 kilograms CO2, or you could do 10 grams CO2, you could do 10 grams CO2, kilograms CO2, per each 1 gallon, and either way works. And I'm sorry, this is really messy writing here. So the way that we needed it was this way, right here. And so we can use that because we want our gallons are at the bottom. So we want our gallons to be able to be crossed out, and that's really, really important. So now the math is actually easy to do at this point. So I can go 3 times 10 is 30, and times 0.27, and this is times 10 to the 5th. So I added, or I multiplied 3 times 10, and then my 10 to the 5th goes down here too. That's a 5. And then I need to multiply that by 0.27. So I can go ahead and do this math problem. And it's 1, 2 decimals in, 1, 2 decimals in. And so my answer is 8.1 times 10 to the 5th, don't forget that, kilograms of carbon. Don't forget your unit. So it looks like we're left with that unit, so that drops down to here. And big, big deal, don't forget this. This is where students forget. They forget to put in the times 10 to the 5th. And that's a big error and a very common error. All right, the next one's actually easier. So the lesson learned is don't give up. In fact, if you want to pause the video and try and solve this one on your own, you can. And then check it. But for this one, we need the answer from number 2 to start with. Because it's asking you to calculate the number of hectares that we need to offset the carbon. So we just found out the carbon per year is 8.1 times 10 to the 5th kilogram. And we also know that per acre, the forest from CI takes in this much carbon per hectare. So this is the answer to 1. So this is the answer to C1. This is the answer to C2. What if you got those wrong? What if you got those answers wrong? That's okay. If you have wrong answers and you use them correctly into C3, that's fine. You can still get the points for C3. Here's another hint. Let's say you just completely mess up and you can't remember how to do number 2. And you have just tons of scribbles and you're like, forget it, I don't know. you can make something up. You can make something up like 50 kilograms of carbon. And if you take that 50 and you plug it in here and use that for your numerator, that's fine. If you use the 50 correctly into C3, you will still get points for C3. We call this no double jeopardy in Apes. And it's also the same for other AP sciences. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and solve this now. Oh, look, this is so beautiful. These cross out. The AP test is like that. They know you don't have a calculator, and they know that the math needs to be able to do without a calculator. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my math off to the side. Remember, when there is a decimal over on this side, you got to get rid of it. So I got rid of it by moving it over twice, and then I need to move this one over twice. I'm going to fill in with zeros, and my new decimal is up here. So I'm not sure how many times 135 and nope, that's not right. Well, what about the next one? 135 times 6. And it looks like that is equal to 810, which is perfect. Oh, I have a little typo up here. I apologize. Some of you probably caught it earlier than me. So this goes in evenly at 6. And so our answer is 6 hectares. Again, if you got the wrong answers for C1 and C2, but you plug them in and you use them correctly, and you get an answer that makes sense, you could get the points for C3. And now C4 is even easier. Now C4 requires the answer to C3. If you can't figure it out, just make up a number for C3 and plug it into C4. So let's say you got the answer of 10 hectares. So if you did the problem correctly, using 10 hectares, then you would get points for C4, but not for C3 because you just made up something for C3. But the real answer is 6, so 6 hectare, and this is $12,000 per hectare, and this is the easiest problem of the day. A lot of you can solve this one in your head. 6 times 12 is 72, so it's $72,000. Again, if you can set it up in your head, you need to at least do the setup in your head on paper. Always write the setup on paper with your units, and you can just then do the rest of it in your head. But always, always, always show the setup. Here's another lesson. It got easier as it went on. So the easiest problem was actually the last one. So don't give up. If you can't figure out C1 or C2, go on. It's okay. Even C4, it's okay. Just make up numbers, plug them in, and continue on from there on the AP test. Try and get some points. And sometimes the questions get easier as they go on.